rigid steel man of what she is saying. However, anytime I hear "take you out," I think of two things. Either, either we're going out on a date, and no, not your, get out of my way. Or alternatively, we're going to enliven you. Now, I do not advocate for enlivening people. I don't think that that is. I think that's.
¿Qué fue eso?
Those are the ways I interpret taking someone out. It's either a date, or you're committing them to a long stay in the not alive mood. Now, again, I am almost 100% certain that's not what she means. I believe this is a poor choice of words. I hope it's a poor choice of words, seeing as she has a notebook in her hand, and I would assume there are notes there about what she wanted to talk about. So I assume that what she meant could have easily been written there. But let's go ahead and continue. I don't want to stick on the point over whether or not this is a call to action. I'm going to steel man it as not one as best I can manage.
All the police officers that take us out for our First Amendment right will also be going down with them. Do you understand?
Wait, so, okay. The police officers, who, despite the variety of problems I have with law enforcement in the United States, who would literally just be doing their jobs by taking you out of there when you are on the run. You're going to vote them out too? Well, no, we can vote the school board in. We can't really do that so much with police officers. Now it's getting a little harder to believe that this is not about taking people to not a live town. I really don't feel comfortable with this rhetoric here. I don't. I really don't. And I don't feel comfortable with how comfortable she is saying it with the backing of Jesus Christ. In a previous video, I made a point about how many kinds of atrocities one could potentially justify with the idea that they have the power of God and anime on their side. And here we are.
I'm a nurse, infectious disease, 13 years. Masks don't work.
Right, so you are a nurse. You've been working for 13 years.
Young.
And you say that masks don't work. Now, being a nurse is not telling you what field you specialize in, first of all.
That's the one.
Do you perhaps have any degrees in urology? Do you perhaps have any degrees in epidemiology? Because if you do, then maybe I would believe this thing a little more. But merely being a nurse, merely working in the medical field broadly, does not mean that you are automatically an authority on all things medical. This is why even several doctors will say things like, I am not giving you medical advice on a particular thing, because if it's outside of your expertise, you just won't know. You don't ask a plastic surgeon to please perform heart surgery on you that day. That's not their job. That's not their field. They both specialize in you open and sewing you back up, but in a variety of different ways. But I think she said infectious disease, but I don't believe her she did. So, a nurse for infectious disease, again, does not necessarily mean that there's expertise here in the field of how the virus is actually going to be spreading. I don't know what nurse infectious disease means here, which is saying that she's a nurse who deals with patients who have been plagued by infectious diseases. When she says masks don't work as well, I have to ask what that in particular means. Because the phrase mask doesn't work, in conversations I've had with people on that terrible cluster club of a website, Facebook, largely based on a misunderstanding of what masks are supposed to do. When you say, masks don't protect you, and, well, to an extent, that is somewhat-ish correct. If I am, walking around take off them because my eyes itch and I have to assess something essential with COVID, then well, that just got in my eyes. It transfers via fluids, so that's a perfect place for it to go and start my inside. But if you are to say masks don't work because they do not prevent the spread of infectious disease, then you would be incorrect. Because, as I stated before, and I'm saying again, COVID itself may be a virus that sits at a measly 1.5 microns in size, and masks may only be able to protect things that are at least 2 microns in size or larger because of the porous nature of masks. It doesn't matter that COVID is smaller, though, since COVID requires a water droplet to actually transfer. Without a droplet, the virus does not have the mechanism in order to go. It's like if you were looking over a cavernous abyss. Technically, yes, you could be transported over that cavernous abyss so long as you had a plane. But without the plane, the cavernous abyss is just a place where you get to jump and die. Don't do that. Don't alive it off a cliff, please. This is an intervention. But no, specifically, the virus itself, because it has to transfer over utilizing that drop, masks are very effective at stopping it from transferring. Cloth masks, or anything with 2 layers of cloth, is going to work. The things that don't work for stopping the spread of COVID are masks with vents, because those vents are areas where water droplets are small enough to escape because of the nature of those vents. And this is something that is backed by data. Usually, when someone say masks don't work, they're trying to argue against what we're already saying masks aren't supposed to do. Masks are not there to protect you from getting COVID largely. There's a degree, like in the event that the water droplet is airborne and it gets just on non-open areas of your skin that you wash off later, and then it would have gotten into your mouth and nose, but the mask was there, so if you get there in instances like that, yes, the mask is protecting you from COVID, but largely, primarily, the goal is to protect other people. When you say masks don't work, I have to argue against it. You're 13 years as a nurse. It's very, very amazing. I respect people who are in that position. I respect the position. But I hate to tell you that despite that, the evidence is against you. When Georgia over at Answers in Genesis talks about her PhD in biology and how she disproves evolution and has a PhD, it is a false argument from authority to say that Georgia is actually speaking truthfully. Same video.
These doctors that sit up here that are sneering at us and looking at us like we're scumbags, they need to go back to fucking medical school.
Yep. So this is what we call projection. When we have the actual size data for what the virus is, how it transfers, and mechanisms by which we can stop it, and you still deny that actual data, that is probably you when you go back to school. Probably. Kind of Valentine. Thank you very much for giving your points. Oh well. Oh well. You've heard that wearing glasses reduces one chance of COVID. Again, that's because your eyes are an open area that if COVID gets into, if the virus gets into, that is an area where moisture that contains the virus can get into. Your glasses are a barrier, not the most effective barrier. You're not really greatly protected by them, but they do offer a layer of protection that you otherwise not have. So everybody, go wear sunglasses tonight.
Get out of order. This is your last warning.
So this is where they start telling your shit out of order.
Communication.
They need
You have their mic is on.
to remember, natural immunity is best. You are all
immunity. Like, it's not artificial immunity. It's not artificial. The way a vaccine works, primarily, not necessarily mRNA vaccine. These are a little bit different. There's a little more mentality going into them. However, I have something like Rivardia here to talk about how they function so that I can not sticking out of my ass. Also, thank you very much for follow, and Lane, thank you for the kind description. But when you get a vaccine, a variant of whatever you are trying to vaccinate is induced your body in a very different state. This allows the primary response of your immune system to trigger. The primary response is largely data collection. It is about whether or not your body is determining if it needs to respond to this thing, and if so, how. That data collection, though, takes time. Then, of course, the secondary response happens, where your body starts actively fighting it. Once your body recognizes something that is in it that it does not want to have, then the secondary response can happen faster because it's already got the thing that's fighting it in its database. So, what is the difference between natural immunity and vaccine-provided immunity? If you receive a sickness and then you gain immunity to it because your body then has a secondary response that's available faster, because the primary response has already happened once. The main difference is, in one case, you get really sick. It is better to be vaccinated against chickenpox than to get chickenpox, even if the end result of both are you not having chickenpox anymore and largely being immune. Getting the vaccine is better than just getting the disease. Same with COVID. Now, COVID's a bit of a unique conversation in that we get 90-ish% protection from the symptom of COVID from the vaccine. That's what it does. And there is data also to suggest that the vaccine mitigates, to an extent, the ability to transfer COVID from one person to another, though the hard numbers for the transfer rate are not known. We do know, however, that apparently the rate of infection for something like the Delta variant is lower than you are a single person who goes into a room with people who are likely to infect them. But, point being, vaccines work. They function. They go through a lot of testing to make sure that they work properly before they get sent out to the public in the vast majority of cases. So when you say that vaccines are worse because natural immunity is better, there's functionally no difference. Vaccine-provided immunity and natural immunity are the same thing. The only difference is you didn't get sick first. So if you say it's better, for instance, were I a parent, if you said it's better for my child to get chickenpox than it is for them to have received the chickenpox vaccine, I'm going to get a different fucking doctor.
Demonic entities who are going to be taken down. The
You
Lord.
already had your first warning, and this is your last. She cannot speak anymore.
Ah! Ha-ha! The value of deplatforming. So, and then we end on her shrieking that all of these people go demonic. Because, again, there is no amount of stupidity that cannot be espoused so long as you believe that there is. That is not the case for everyone, nor every person who believes in a deity. But dear Lord in heaven, insofar as he exists, for Aaron on the floor, if you are going to advocate for something, please do it not because you believe it is your God-given to do so, but because you have evidence on your side. Have that evidence first, and then post talk your God into it later if you must. But evidence first. And in this case, this is just, you literally have zero evidence that the people who are working around you at the school board are possessed by demons. And we have evidence that masks function and work. But, I hate to be the person that titles this video, Unhinged Karen Goes on Anti-Mask Rant, but feel like it's clickbaity enough. We'll see. We'll see. And hopefully I don't do too many of these. I feel kind of dirty doing the video like that. With all that said, though, if you enjoyed my content, what I do, please hit the like and subscribe button. And as always,
Welcome to r/choosing beggars. We're
okay, I should have started this section way earlier, but we had to deal with all kinds of fun animal related things. So we're talking about CRT, which I'm sure if you have parents who watch Fox News, you are absolutely tired of hearing about CRT. And Fox News is specifically what we're going to be talking about. Lakakwa, thank you for resubscribing. Been a hard few days. Thank you for being an awesome present. Well, I don't think that my presence is a present. I think it's more of a terrible surprise that you really didn't want the shower. But you know, here we are.
Sempre sim de computador.
Here we are. So let's get into the banner section first before we talk about Fox News's latest.
Ô gato, não posso.
From Invader, oh God, they changed their name. I cannot say the last part of their name. I can show you what it is, but those words are war words, and I cannot speak them on this platform. But from Invader, you're a horrible person for almost tricking me to saying it. Thank you very much for the banner of Beach Necosaurus chilling out at the beach. And then from Fat GLaDOS, we have Manakai Nekosuris said, I've seen to need some help in the luck department, so hopefully these help. And there are 3 variations of them to go through. And I think these are very cute. And people were trying to tell me, save you coward. No! It costs 50,000 channel points to even begin that terrible, terrible mission of yours. As always, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown on the channel, the best way to do so is probably in the fan art section of the Discord. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please consider doing so. If you haven't checked out the various ways you can support this channel down in the description, please consider doing so. We even have merch now. If you would like to choose a side in the Great War, the Ovo Wars, where the correct side is the Ovo side, but I'm not going to judge you based on the side you choose. At least that's what I'm telling you right now. On that note, let's get into this. Now, what is this video? Well, this is a Colorado father explaining why critical race theory keeps racism on life support. He's explaining this on Fox News, which, for those of you who don't know, is not really a legitimate news organization so much as they are news-flavored entertainment. In fact, some of their hosts, such as Tucker Carlson, you legally cannot take them seriously. It has been a legal offense used by Fox News. So if you just, for some reason, are under a rock and are not familiar with the brand of entertainment that Fox News is, I came across this video because it was an advertisement on a video that I was watching. I forget which video it was, but this came up. And I was like, oh my god, it's a 5-minute Fox News segment being played as a YouTube ad. Guess I need to go ahead and watch this. I guess it's a thing that I should probably pay attention to. So let's go ahead. I need to actually increase the volume. There we go.
Is critical race theory
Apparently I need to increase the volume even more. Open volume mixer. Why is it so low? That's as high as it'll go. The sound mixing on this is just awful then. So I guess we have to go here in the filters and increase the gain. Alright, Fox News, let's go.
moving America backwards?
So it's critical race theory moving America backwards. That is what is being said here on Fox and Friends. So let's go ahead and see what the Peanut Gallery has to say about critical race theory.
The argument one father, who was a descendant of slaves, made as he explained the harsh reality of the controversial teachings to his school board.
Now, I love how they describe the father as a descendant of slaves. Chances are, if you are an African American in the United States, you are a descendant of slaves. You could have just said he's an African American, but you specifically had to point out he's a descendant of slaves. Let me go ahead and explain right now. If you're a descendant of slaves, it really doesn't change much of your outlook on. It really shouldn't change much of your outlook on life. Now, there are things closer in proximity to you that probably, more than likely, had a huge effect on you. Things like Jim Crow. You probably have parental figures or grandparents who lived through the Jim Crow era. But as far as being a child of, a descendant of slaves, I'm sure that matters in terms of heritage, and that heritage is something that a lot of people do take pride in. But in terms of what effect it actually has on you, that effect is potentially minimal. As far as the slavery portion is concerned specifically. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this real quick. Let's see.
I am not oppressed.
Okay? You, as an individual, not being oppressed, does not account for all of the myriads of ways in which people who are African American in the United States are disadvantaged. But go on, Derek.
I'm not oppressed, and I'm not a victim. I have 3 children. They are not oppressed either, although they are victims. Racism in America would by and large be dead today if it were not for certain people and institutions keeping it on life support.
Like Fox News? Now, I'm sure that he's talking about like the education system and critical race theory, despite the fact that that's not really taught outside of college law classes, but
Sadly, one of those institutions is the the American education system.
Yep, there it is.
That father, Derek Wilburn, joins us now. Derek, I saw the whole thing. It's incredibly motivating. I know I speak for all of us. What a powerful statement. You said, my kids are victims. They could be victims of their own ignorance, of their own laziness, and you pounded home the fact that you're teaching kids to feel like they are oppressed is ultimately the worst thing you can do. What was the impetus for stepping up to that podium?
So wait, I'm actually curious. In what ways are children being taught that they are oppressed? Because I don't really think that that's happening all that much, and I don't hear from many people that that is what's happening. Now, if you are taught in your school in a history class that we at one point participated in slavery, and that the effects of that slavery, the effects of it, not your personal mindset. Your personal mindset is not going to be changed by that terribly much. That's going to be a product of how you orient yourself. But the actual effects of that slavery are still felt around. Things like generational wealth are lower in African American societies because there have been various points in time where they have not been able to garner as much wealth. And this is a thing backed up by statistics. Generally speaking, if you are white in America, your likelihood of having inherited generational wealth is infinitely higher. And it doesn't mean that white people just work that much harder than black people in the United States. It has to do with the amount of time people have actually been on a level playing field. We might be having a different conversation here in 100 years. Very likely we'll have a different conversation here in 100 years. But right now, there are people alive today who were dealing with Jim Crow. But let's go on.
Every cloud has its silver lining. And one of the silver linings of this year and a half of COVID mania has been with children at home, doing learning from home, doing schooling from home. More and more parents are looking at their kids' schoolwork and saying, what's really going on down there at that school?
I'm just going to say this right now. Not every parent has an education degree, and not every parent is going to be able to make heads or tails of what is actually being taught in their school or why. There are parents who, when they hear that a science curriculum is being taught that does not include a 6,000-year-old Earth, freak the hell out because their pastor says that they should. There are parents that hear things like critical race theory and immediately think that it's saying that white people are evil, and they freak out as a result of fear. Remember, I live in an area where people still fly Confederate flags everywhere, despite the fact that they are the quintessential participation trophy. Been there, done that. The fact that parents can see the education material does not mean that they're going to be able to understand all of it. But continue on, Derek.
It's built with my tax dollars, and that's funded with my tax dollars. And started to take a closer look. And that's what happened to me. I started showing up at school board meetings in my district and in other districts around our city and taking a closer look at what's happening. And dozens of other parents have begun to do the same thing. So what they used to be able to slide in under the radar without parents really knowing, they no longer can. And when the CRT came around, I got to looking at it and said, not in my school, and began showing up.
Okay. Yeah. Can you explain what CRT is, or potentially, can you explain in which way CRT has manifested in your school? I'm willing to believe that you believe that CRT has reared its ugly head in your school in some way, shape, or form, but I would really like to know the specific way in which it manifested, because typically I either see strawmans of what critical race theory actually is in an academic sense, or more often I hear incredibly vague allusions to what might be being said. I remember at one point hearing somebody say that they were mad because schools were teaching kids that if they wanted to be the best version of themselves, they should be someone else. And I had no idea what that meant. And I asked for clarification, but I didn't get anything. I got, well, I mean what I said is what I got. And that statement alone means nothing to me. Because of my time on the internet, I want to say that it was talking about trans people. How to be the best version of yourself is to be a gender that you don't normally perform as, and that could have been a problem for this particular parent. But I could never find out. I wasn't going to press the topic more time. This was a real life conversation, and in real life, it's not like Twitter where we get to go into the throats forever. In real life, adults back down when they realize that a conversation is becoming circular because there's no point in continuing said conversation after that. They're really not. Like, that's just kind of a thing you learn when you're an adult. At least some of us do.
My school, not my kids. I'm also Hispanic, and I think it's so important that minorities step up who know that this is disruptive. I can't agree with you more that it's so important that we teach our kids that they're not victims. The whole premise of CRT is that it's supposed to bring about racial harmony. Aren't we seeing more divisions? Aren't we making
Wait, no. CRT isn't about bringing apart racial harmony. Nothing about CRT is about bringing racial harmony. What the fuck? Let me give you an example of critical race theory. Critical race theory is about analyzing what ways that racism has piloted various aspects of society despite individual people not necessarily being racist. So an example of historical racism that CRT would analyze, I've said this in the previous episode, I'll say it again. Let's say you've got a bank, okay, and a bank is deciding whether or not they're going to give out a loan to an African American person in the 1930s. Now, the redlining that was happening around that time would have put this African American individual in a sector that the bank would not give a loan to, meaning that they would not be leaving that sector because they wouldn't be moving to a new location in order to leave that redline sector. And likely the places they'd be able to afford would also be other red line sectors. If you've ever rented versus owning a house, you know that in many cases, owning a house can just be cheaper than renting. But getting the capital to even own that, like do the down payment on that house, there's where you run into issues. Now, the bank is not going to be denying this person a loan because they're black. That's not what the bank is doing, technically. What they're doing is they're going to use one aspect to determine whether or not they should give the loan. One of the aspects would be the geographical location. And the geographical location of this person would be in a red lined area. This area is a place where the bank does not give out a loan. Now, it just so happens that these red lined areas comprise primarily of minority groups. And people who immigrated here, African Americans who were descendants from slaves. These groups, by and large, are the ones that have these red areas. So while technically the bank is not denying you that loan because you're black, what's in effect happening is it is because you're black. Because the fact that you're black increased the likelihood exponentially that you would be in one of those red line areas because the next generation comes along and they live in that red line area too, and they don't get to get out of it either. The next generation comes along, they don't get to get out of it either. So you keep money sinking yourself in these red line districts, and it prevents you from being able to do things like accumulate generational wealth. And that generational wealth, that ability to engage in home ownership, those are things that were not as experienced by those minority communities in the 30s, and that has affected people going forward. If you are part of a family that has owned their own home for several generations, the outlook and your prospects individually are going to be much higher than a family that has been stuck in a single apartment for, however many generations, or even worse, that had your apartment top for many generations. Because that's pretty much what models do. Where we have to constantly try to go to the apartment available top to do so. So CRT looks at the situation and goes, the individual banker, the bank, they may not be racist. Because the because of the inability to engage in home ownership earlier, to engage in that investment earlier, and to begin accumulating generational wealth. CRT looks at that as a matter of a system. It says, hey, this system had racism in it, and that created a problem for the people going forward. CRT is a lens of legal analysis. There's nothing about that that is attempting to create harmony among the races. It's not like you go into law school and you start studying critical race theory, and they sit you down with your white, brown, yellow, and other members of various races and say it's time to sing Kumbaya so we can try to get reparations from all the white folks in the room. That's not a thing that happens with CRT, because that's not its role. Now, that's a straw man that Fox News and other organizations have supported a lot with CRT, but that's not what CRT is. It doesn't care about you as an individual. It doesn't think that you as an individual person are any more or less a problem as far as racism. You as an individual are not part of the conundrum. The systems you either participate in or have been forced to be a part of, those are the things that CRT looks at. School, because of this previous redlining, these same geographical locations will be the places that are not able to fund schools. The schools are funded primarily by a housing tax, and less money is going into housing taxes if everybody is renting low apartments. This means that the area itself ends up being a low income area, and low income areas have less money to put towards school maintenance. Critical race theory looks at this and goes, oh, hold on. So this black person who's not able to accumulate generational wealth because of the system is also being educated by an underfunded organization because of a similar system. That's both they're both based in that previous amount of redlining. And then you move forward and you wonder, well, what are their children going to be? What are their children's children going to be? How long does, or how far does this impact those generations? That you have positive impact from your previous generations, and negative impact from your previous generations. That's clear. And hopefully it expands and too much.
Making kids more obsessed with race when they don't even care about it.
You're exactly right. The agenda they're trying to put in place is doing the exact opposite of that which they claim to be in favor of. So critical race theory at its core, critical race theory is claiming that race is not so much biological, but a social construct.
Well, yeah, race is a social construct. I hate to tell you this, 110%, but genetically, there is more variance within, within white people. There is more genetic similarity with us and some African Americans than there are within other various white people. Like the idea of race, for those who don't know, the idea of what race is was established before we had any idea what genetics were. If you look at the origins of the word Caucasian, it predates our understanding of genetics by a country mile. We did not have the proper tools to analyze what biologically made us us when these concepts were coined and when these concepts were solidified to social zeitgeist. Yes, your race is a social construct. There are biological differences between you and other people, and there are commonalities between these various groupings of people. But the concept of race, as it exists, is a socially constructed phenomenon.
Social construct that was put in place predominantly by the Caucasian majority to keep the ethnic minority, the colored people, the people of color oppressed and in some ways subservient.
All right, so if you, I have a question. I'm just going to throw this out to the audience. I'm going to throw it out to the people talking to us, assuming that any of them are the ones in that line in that debunk their stupid nonsense. Is a Jewish person white? Is an Irish person white? Depending on who you ask, and most importantly, depending on how far you go back in time, the answer is different. Most Jewish people today, you look at them and you're like, yeah, they're white. Look at Ben Shapiro. Yeah, he's white. Look at most people who are Irish today. You look at them, yeah, they're white. What? No, they're white. Why does it matter? That was not the case historically. What was and wasn't white was largely determined by other people. If you want to sit here and say that race was not socially constructed, you have to account for these things. If you want to sit here and say that this was not organized as a method of, at the very least, categorizing people and then subjugating them based on those categorizations later on down the road, at the very least, then you have to account for the fact that for the longest time we had issues with Irish people. Like, you have to account for those things. These are things that happen in history. And these things only make sense through the lens of race as a social construct that is as fluid as the people determining it within the social zeitgeist.
And my whole point was, I'm not oppressed at all. I live in a beautiful home in Colorado Springs, which I refinanced last week. And I had mortgage companies and banks tripping over themselves, trying to give me their business. Not a one of them saw that checkbox that said African American and said, sorry, we don't do business with your kind.
But because they didn't do that historically either, at least not in such a blatant way in many cases. Now, the further back you go, a lot of that happened is increasing. But remember, it's not about the color of your skin as a biological determining mechanism. It is about the likelihood of your social categorization of people being more or less advantaged, and how those advantages and disadvantages manifest. You can say that you individually, as an individual person, are not oppressed. And cool, that's great. I'm not telling you you are. I'm not going to sit here and say, no, you definitely are oppressed. No, it's likely you might not be. You are in a very wonderful position, and I applaud you for that. That is a great thing, and is a thing to be proud of. And dear God, the monitor on your desk is tiny. How do you see it? Anyway, depending on where you happen to be, the color of your skin likely will have a determining factor in many outcomes in your life. That is something that we know as a matter of statistics. The likelihood that if you get imprisoned, that it will have a longer sentence. There is an aspect of your skin color that goes into that. The likelihood of being pulled over by the police in the first place, there is an aspect of your skin color that goes into that. The likelihood of getting a job in any time is more or less likely based on the name that you have written down and how white it may or may not sound, how palatable it might sound to somebody who comes from suburbia. These are things that we have largely analyzed. We have been able to determine. Statistics are factors in the way society operates. You, as an individual, this is the thing with statistics. If African American people make up 15% of the population, right? 13% of the population, and 35% of them, hell, 65%, we'll go with that, but we'll play with big numbers today. 65% of them are not able to accumulate generational wealth, and these are numbers that I'm making up for a point here. If 65% of them are not able to experience thing A, it is a matter of statistical fact that the other people in those statistics can or do experience the thing that the majority. Congratulations. You as an individual succeeded, and that is a wonderful thing. But statistically, we already knew you existed. We already knew you existed. And I can understand being proud of that. Be proud of your personal successes. You did it. It's a thing to be happy with. It's a thing to pass on to your children. But if you exist as one of the 5%, 7%, maybe even 10% of people who are able to experience this wonderful thing, understand that you've already been accounted for in the data within that percentage. And there is another percentage of people who do not or cannot experience those wonderful successes that you observe. The fact that there is more generational wealth amongst predominantly white families, the fact that homeownership is more common among predominantly white families in America, the fact that their sentences via the police are shorter predominantly compared to African Americans dealing with the exact same offenses in the exact same district, with the exact same history. Histories as far as legal concerned. These are points of analysis that have to be factored in. I'm so happy that you as an individual have done a wonderful job with you and your family. You've already been accounted for the data. It's not happening to you, it's not it doesn't happen to other people.
That's never happened to me. Those days are 50 years ago, but they want to drag them into today.
Nobody's trying to drag them into today. Or rather, actually, let me rephrase that. There are people trying to drag that into today because Nazi exists. That is a thing. There are people like Black Hitler himself, Nazi, who are trying to drag every issue from before into today. Yes. That's not what CRT is doing. CRT is not trying to drag the issues from before into today. They're looking at those issues and analyzing how much of an effect they did or did not have on people going forward, and largely finding that they have had an effect going forward.
And act like it's still going on when it's not. I'm not oppressed by anybody.
Derek, you got the approval of all the white people in the room. Congratulations, you're famous.
This is like your own, I think, are often marginalized, not given the platform that I think, quite honestly, they deserve. Do you feel like the point of view that you
Wait. Don't tell me that you're going to go with the you're definitely not oppressed, you're definitely not marginalized, and then out of the other side of your mouth say people like you are not often able to get the platform. People like you are often marginalized away from it. Please don't tell me you're doing that when you're trying to suck each other's cocks about how racism is over. Please don't tell me that you did that. That is absolutely true. Adrian Gray, thank you very much for following.
you have embraced as a Black American descendant of slaves. Do you think the point of view that you espoused at that podium is representative of a larger percentage of the Black population in America than we might fully understand? Or are you more a lone voice out there pushing back on this idea that everyone is oppressed?
So, before he answers, I will go ahead and poison this well. His perspective on this particular point does not matter. Because without actual data on how many people do or do not believe a thing, his answer will be out of his ass.
I think it's the former. I think there are more voices who truly understand what's happening, see what's happening, and want to do something about it, but they are not given a platform or podium. I was invited on Fox and Friends this morning, and I'm grateful for that. It's 4:30 in the morning here, so
So, you're definitely not marginalized. You're definitely offered all the exact same opportunities as everybody else. But, you're not often offered that. Now, this could be taken both ways. It could be taken the funny way, which is, I'm definitely not marginalized, and yet I'm marginalized off the platform. That's the funny way to take it. the most steelmanny way that we can take this is that the people who claim they're oppressed are more often given the platform, and that could also be what it is. So I'm personally choosing to take it the steelmanny way because I think arguments are much stronger when you fight steelman. But I'm willing to acknowledge, as I did earlier, that perhaps the phrasing here could have been better. And it's amazing how they keep on saying this sentence.
But I'm grateful for that. But this phone call will not be coming from CNN. We know that. This phone call will not be coming from MSNBC. They have no desire to put people like me up front and center to say the things that I'm saying because they want to maintain cattle on a vote farm.
No. Okay, so yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, that is a thing that is likely happening over at CNN. Because CNN is part of it. But no, it is not unique that Fox is grabbing you. What you need to understand is you are giving a very conservative opinion for everyone there. Fox wants you. There's nothing unique about you being brought on as the token black man in a room of white folks in suits. There's nothing unique about that when you consider what Fox's platform is. Just like there's nothing unique about CNN pushing Joe Biden is not unique. We know that's what they're doing. Fox News pushing Donald Trump is not unique. We know what they're going to do. There's nothing special about being on the other side of the coin. You're on a fucking coin either way.
And that's unfortunate because ultimately the black community is the one that's suffering.
Absolutely. Derek, the
We
vote was
appreciate you getting up at 4:30, by the way.
I really do. The vote was 3-2. Were you surprised by that, by the way? So it is banned in your district for now, right?
It is banned for now, and in the neighboring district, District 20, the president has come out and verbally and said on camera with microphones rolling, CRT is not coming to this district either. There hasn't been a vote yet, but slowly but surely, parents are rising up, and we are pushing these school boards and letting these people know, look, you're elected representatives of the people, and this is what we want. If you don't like it, we'll vote you out. And the boards are beginning to respond.
So I do want to say, also, Paulo Heritage, thank you so much for the follow. But I do want to say, it astounds me how often people don't understand that were this any other issue, were this an issue of science, not one that have an issue of platform, which is something that is argued at length in other states still. When it's issues like this, having a group of conservative Christian parents screeching about how you don't want to talk to your kids, most people would accept that, yeah, no, it doesn't fucking matter that you don't want to talk to your kids. It's scientific fact. You're going to accept it. You don't get to force your children into a fantasy land like I was forced into a PPA. But when it's CRT, because most people don't understand what the fuck that means, they're like, yeah, no, we don't want CRT here. I have to wonder, was it that CRT was being taught at your school and then now it's being ripped away after this vote? Or is it that CRT was never actually taught in your school and the fact that you had a chance to look at those materials now as a parent didn't actually factor into any of this at all, and you just got really upset. CRT didn't get a chance to be taught before. I'm curious if CRT was actually taught. If you are part of the Colorado education system, you are listening in on this, and you are part of District 20 or District 12 or whichever district they have to be in. Don't dox yourself. Please don't. But I would like perspective if possible. Because from what I understand about CRT, how it's taught, none of that shit's happening in many of these places. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you're being taught that, oh, you're oppressed, chances are you're not being taught critical race. That's something entirely different than Fox and other organizations and the thoroughly buzzword. But that want to know what you guys think. Not only do I want to know from people who might be participating in either case, but I want to know what you think in general about the idea of basically bringing on a certain black guy to talk about how racism is dead for 50 years. I feel like, personally, that feels like a ridiculously privileged position to think that racism just died, despite the fact that, especially here, there's this, it's not consensus, there's this idea that the difference between a black person and an N-word is whether or not they protest. That's a legitimate conversation I've had with somebody that I still think back on to this day as so scary. But let me know what you think. Let me know, and if you expand on what I do, then as always, everybody is nice.
Synanon claims it's the victim of bad publicity, losing more than $100,000 in grants and contracts. Fewer addicts are being sent there. Parents are disowning their children who live there. Some filing lawsuits charging brainwashing and torture. And a grand jury is investigating charges of child abuse.
Hello and welcome to the Corporate Casket, a bi-weekly series where bad businesses go to die. We will discuss any and everything from bad charities, terrible CEOs, and businesses that have a lot to hide. I'm the Illuminati, and today we're going to be talking about Synanon. So this script came heavily requested to me by one person in particular, which is Allie, who's my main researcher. I've done a few videos about schools or rehab centers going wrong by now, but when she was digging through this, one name cropped up a couple times as a source to all these issues, Synanon. You guys remember the Elan School, the places that encourage this type of like weird group therapy where you just straight up crap on the other person that they're there for help, supposedly, and make them hate themselves enough to change? Well, Synanon basically invented that. They are the granddaddy of these types of places. When we saw this sentence on their Wikipedia page, we knew it was episode time. Synanon disbanded in 1991 due to members being convicted of criminal activities, including attempted murder and retroactive loss of its tax-free status with the Internal Revenue Service due to financial misdeeds, destruction of evidence, and terrorism. It has been called one of the most dangerous and violent cults America has ever seen. So, needless to say, today's episode is going to be a bit of a ride. I will put a trigger warning right here at the beginning to let you know that there will obviously be mentions of violence and very brief mentions of this cult abusing animals on 2 separate occasions. There's a whole portion of this video dedicated to just their violence, so I'll remind you again when we get to that part. But with that being said, let's get into it. Synanon started as a drug rehabilitation center founded by Charles E. Diedrich Sr., or Chuck, in 1968 in Santa Monica, California. The name was chosen when a member blurred the words symposium and seminar together. I've got no idea how that ends up as Synanon, but the name is the least of our concerns. Now, Charles himself has a pretty interesting history. According to one source, Diedrich was born in Ohio in 1913. At age 4, when his father died in an auto crash, his mother, an accomplished pianist, made him the family male figure and her favorite. At age 8, his youngest brother died of influenza, and Diedrich felt guilty and responsible. He would never bond with kids again, including his own, until they became adults. At age 12, his mother remarried, and Diedrich went on a jealous rage, turning to drinking and rebel rousing. He flunked out of Notre Dame for lack of effort and worked for the Mellon family. He married, but drinking ended it. He was saved by meningitis in the 1940s by the discovery of penicillin. It left a droopy eye and a facial tic. He decided to move to Santa Monica and become a beach bum. Got a job at Hughes Tools. He remarried, but alcohol did in that marriage too. He was found passed out on the kitchen floor and was told, "Fatso, if you do not go to Alcoholics Anonymous, you will die." Diedrich became an AA favorite speaker and went to an AA meeting every day. During a bout of paranoia where he could not leave his room, he read Emerson's Self-Reliance, and using it as a Bible, he quit his job to devote full time to cleaning up other alcoholics. He existed on a $35 unemployment check and charity from others. He volunteered for a Dr. Keith Dittman LSD experiment, and he felt he had a cathartic breakthrough and now understood the world and the good and the bad were the same. He studied on his own in a library, and his AA speeches changed from typical religious overtones to a psychological/philosophy slant. He gathered his own following in AA, and after a time of meetings at apartments, they rented a small store in seedy Venice. The original name was the Tender Loving Care Club. They played the game in which anyone was allowed to say anything, true or not, to someone to cause an effect. Only the threat of violence was prohibited. It was a game because one being gamed could turn the game on another. They survived by begging for stale food from catering trucks, hookers doing tricks, and donations. For a shower, a hose ran through a window. This tender, loving care club became, of course, Synanon. Now, you guys know how I feel about qualifications here. I do get really upset when I hear about former MLMers founding a supplement company, when they've got no experience as a dietitian, nutritionist, none of that. Easily one of my pet peeves here. If you're not qualified to speak on a certain subject, don't teach it to others. If you want to share a personal anecdote or offer advice, I suppose that's fine, but I think that at the very least, an actual professional, whether a therapist or a trained counselor, should have been there. I'm not saying Chuck was wrong for wanting to help these people, but already I feel like this game could do more harm than good. Plus, it's already been said that Chuck didn't like himself very much. He didn't seem to have high self-esteem, so I feel like this could very easily have gone into him projecting and that sort of territory. That's absolutely just my opinion, though. Moving on. In 1959, Synanon moved from the TLC Club in Ocean Park to an old National Guard armory in Santa Monica, and holy hell did they start to grow. During this time, Synanon's program was established and started to get a good reputation. Diedrich preached act as if, which meant do not try to reason as to what Synanon asked they do, as thinking got them there. Just trust what they were told and act as if it is right. This source also states, in 1962, Diedrich moved into an empty National Guard building on the beach in Santa Monica. Neighbors complained, fearing Synanon could unleash non-recovered addicts into Santa Monica who came from other areas. I'm not sure which is correct, if it's 1959 or 1962. Most other sources say 1959, but the point I want to make here is that they were growing. However, it seemed that officials also agreed with me here about having a professional on board for things like these. Because Diedrich was arrested for operating in Santa Monica without a health license and out of zone. Convicted rather than move as condition of probation, he chose to go to jail. One source reads, this made him a public hero, and Governor Edmund Brown Sr. signed a Save Synanon bill, giving Synanon an exception from health licensing laws. Synanon was allowed to have members kick addiction cold turkey without drugs. The medical board was to establish rules for Synanon, but never did. The imprisonment made Dietrich a public martyr. Monetary donations came in from the rich and Hollywood as guys like Robert Wagner, Leonard Nimoy, and Ben Gazzara came to Synanon to play the game with ex-addicts and ex-hookers. Life magazine did a 14-page photo spread, which a congressman called The Miracle on the Beach, and Columbia Pictures made a movie, Synanon, starring Edmund O'Brien, Chuck Connors, and Stella Stevens. With its sudden fame, by early 1964, Synanon had also become an alternative community, attracting people with its emphasis on living a self-examined life, as aided by group truth-telling sessions known as the Synanon Game. With its new wealth, they started building its first city in Marin County. Professionals, even those without drug addictions, were eagerly invited to join, provided they transferred their assets to the organization. Control over members occurred through the Synanon Game. The game could be considered a therapeutic tool likened to group therapy, or a social control, in which members humiliated one another and encouraged the exposure of one's innermost weaknesses or both. Members were to confess in games and no secrets were allowed. And please know that I am quoting here. I do know the term that we now use is sex workers, not hookers, but that is the quote. But yeah, you unfortunately heard that all right. So from pretty early on, Synanon was getting noticed and gaining power. There's records of Edgar Hoover himself saying that he believes Synanon was a lot like Alcoholics Anonymous, dated November 20th, 1964. There's another which seems to be from the Greater Petaluma Area Chamber of Commerce that states, everyone who has heard of them, Synanon, was most impressed with their sincerity and determination. However, before extending out unqualified sanction and support, we would appreciate having some information on Synanon rather than what is announced in their news releases and public speeches. We are in great sympathy with their efforts as described to us by them. I don't want to say that the government wasn't investigating them, but it sure as hell doesn't seem concerning to them. Surely they knew that Synanon started as an operation without a license, and you'd think they'd be a little bit more concerned instead of just saying, hey, we appreciate some info on the place. Other sources speculate that it really was the Hollywood scene, the boom of Santa Monica itself, and the visits from the governor of California that propelled Synanon into popularity. Dietrich insisted recovery rates were anywhere from 80 to 100%, even though those numbers weren't confirmed. By 1965, Synanon started buying up land in Marin County until it had 3 sites in the county, comprising of just over 3,300 acres, making it the largest private property owner in the county at that time. And that same year, as mentioned earlier, Synanon got its own movie. How wild is that? A movie about a rehab facility, and the trailer is just something else. An actor named Edmund O'Brien starred as Dietrich, and I swear, this movie is everything you could expect from a typical 60s movie. And I mean, look, old movies, they're fantastic. Sure, I've got a soft spot in my heart for them, but, this one just isn't going to be one of them. I mean, if Synanon was really trying to heal people, why portray them as screaming, hysterical criminals? Disclaimer here, though, maybe this trailer doesn't do the movie justice. I could be completely wrong. Point is, they were growing and definitely getting noticed. And let's just take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, Daily Harvest. Because honestly, some days we all know it's really hard to find the motivation to cook. And, unless you're not depressed or an anxious noodle like I am, you may not relate to that, but I feel most of you can. And when you are a depressed, anxious noodle, or you're having a bad day or whatever, even if you're having a good day, nothing really does taste better than fresh ingredients down your stomach. I know fast food, chicken nuggies, all those things, those are delicious too, but they can leave you feeling groggy or just unmotivated afterwards. And Daily Harvest changes the game with that because they deliver fresh food, and I'm talking like smoothies, flatbreads, harvest bowls, and soups. It goes right to your door, and it's built on organic fruits and vegetables. And it's ready when you are. Everything stays fresh in your freezer until you're ready to enjoy it, so you're wasting less food as well. And they don't use any preservatives, added sugars, or artificial anything. And Daily Harvest is also committed to minimizing their environmental impact because they're in the process of transitioning to 100% compostable, recyclable, plant-based, and renewable fiber packaging. Daily Harvest is undeniably delicious, clean food without the prep, the mess, or the cleanup. So if you want to get started today, make sure to go to dailyharvest.com and enter promo code CASKET to get $25 off your first box. Again, that's promo code CASKET for $25 off your first box at dailyharvest.com. Again, that's dailyharvest.com. After just a few years, however, things changed a bit. As opposed to being public, well-known, popular enough for a movie, Synanon just sort of began to retreat into itself. The beginnings of the cult began, and they've just called it the Lifestyler. As one source explains, by 1968, the new type of Synanon membership was established, the Lifestyler. Members of this group were allowed to have jobs outside of Synanon and live outside of the Synanon community, provided they gave most of their income to the organization. This new kind of member allowed Synanon to fill its coffers with outside money that it had otherwise been reluctant to receive. After all, the organization was leaving a lot of cash on the table by declining government-funded grants. Why? Those grants stipulated that there be some kind of independent examination and verification of success rates through drug tests and the like. These were flatly rejected. This experiment with lifestylers wouldn't last long, however, as this type of member was often accused of not being committed enough to the cause. Most lifestylers washed out of the program, though some joined the ranks fully, leaving their homes behind as a show of true commitment. By 1968, the group was becoming even more isolationist, with Dietrich declaring that it would no longer graduate any of their members. This meant that no addict who kicked their addiction would be allowed to graduate to a life outside of Synanon. What little pretense the group had about helping addicts rejoin the outside world had been dropped. Synanon was now the only place to be, a narrowly focused utopian experiment that was ready to swallow you whole. And look, I've never gone through a rehab facility program for alcohol or drugs, but isn't the point to get you ready to build your life again? This whole attitude of once you're sober, you're part of the community forever is a little bit worrying. But Synanon, with its fantastic reputation, was probably trusted by these vulnerable groups just trying to get clean and move on. It's a little bit more than problematic that Synanon took the moving on part away and growing out of the habit part. The thing is, I want to believe that Chuck started off with fantastic intentions. Misguided, sure, but well intentioned. However, things went so far off the rails that Synanon was no longer a rehab facility. According to the LA Magazine, Synanon eventually operated centers up and down California, morphing into a utopian community, then a religion and a cult with more than $30 million in assets of more than 1,300 followers. True believers shaved their heads, wore overalls, and lived together at Synanon compounds, professing an almost lavish obedience to Dietrich, no matter how brutal his methods. Synanon officially labeled themselves as a church in 1974. Dietrich's movement deteriorated completely in the late 70s after his third wife dies, and he declared a policy of mass divorce and mate swapping. More than 200 couples complied. When he prohibited any more children, 4 women had abortions and nearly 200 men had vasectomies, all under Dietrich's instruction. Though Dietrich himself didn't have a vasectomy because, as he stated, "I am not bound by rules, I make them." Large-scale defections followed, as did press reports on the strange turn Synanon had taken. Its long-standing ban on violence was reversed. Recruits were mustered for the Imperial Marines and given intense training in Sino-Do, a version of karate. There were rumors of an arms cache worth $300,000 of an enemies list of beatings and death threats. The words getting around, Dietrich said at one point, "Don't fuck with Synanon." The thing is, when you become a cult, people tend to take notice. And, I mean, sometimes they do. Not so much with Heaven's Gate, but they flew under the radar for some time. Synanon, on the other hand, had a recognizable name in the area, so for them to suddenly change policies, their stance on violence, all of that, yeah, it was a little suspicious to say the least. And now, horrifically, children were also being involved. It's bad enough that adults fell into Chuck Dietrich's trap, but they brought innocent kids along with them. One source stated, in Synanon, children eventually were raised in a hatchery and considered community children since 1966 with parental contact forever discouraged. This is an experiment giving public knowledge today, not likely to ever be tried again, except in cults where children are desired to be kept away in order to lower costs and less interfere with the adult service and bonding to the community. Many Synanon children also witnessed changing partners, as we mentioned earlier. Starting in 2000, former member Susan Richardson, as a requirement of obtaining her bachelor's degree in humanities, wrote a paper called Growing Up in Synanon. She also noted the children were exposed to a course of severe punitive practices like shaved heads, forced confessions, humiliations, and other aspects applied from Synanon's failed drug rehab. Any success Synanon had, and there was some success, it is submitted here, was based upon each member's decision to reform upon entry and the friendships, community jobs, mates provided, all establishing self-esteem, training, and meeting social needs, and not the Synanon abuse system, which in fact was counterproductive and drove many out. And yes, you did hear that all right. I feel like a lot of the research here has me just doing a variety of double takes. Like, babies were actually taken from their mothers and raised in a so-called hatchery. Like, what kind of fuckery is this? And just to clarify, I'm not saying like adoption or swinging or any of that is automatically cult-like behavior. That's not what this was. These kids weren't like being given different parents. They weren't being parented at all. Synanon stopped allowing contact with outsiders, and Diedrich, as all of this was getting worse and worse, was abusing LSD. I swear, what is it with cult leaders and turning to drugs at some point? Even Jim Jones had good intentions when he started the People's Temple. It wasn't until it became Jonestown that he was abusing drugs and things took very dark and tragic turns. At Synanon, abused children began running away, helped by a neighbor named Alvin Gambonini. Credit to you, Alvin. I've got absolutely no idea who you are other than this, but people like these are the secret heroes behind the scenes. As for one of the heroes in front of the scenes and in front of the cameras, we have to talk about Paul Morantz. Paul, if you're watching this, and I doubt he is, he's 75 and probably has other things to do, thank you. Without Paul, this could have gone on for who knows how long. Paul Morantz, you see, is an investigative journalist and an attorney who specializes in cults, brainwashing groups, and sexual misconduct by psychotherapists. He's considered an expert in these subjects, and Synanon certainly qualifies for two of them. Can't speak for the third, but I definitely say it's a brainwashing cult, at least in my opinion. One of my biggest sources for this topic has absolutely been Paul's website because he breaks everything down piece by piece, year by year. I highly recommend it if you want to read even more on Synanon. But this is how Paul got involved. In 1977 in Santa Monica, Synanon took in a woman with a pre-psychotic break and would not return her to her husband and transferred her to Tamales Bay. The husband hired attorney Paul Morantz, who had recently finished a case against persons who had kidnapped Skid Row alcoholics and kept them on Thorazine in nursing homes in order to build a state. Morantz and Synanon locked horns for 8 years. A grand jury in Marin County, pushed by Paul Morantz, issued a scathing report in March of 1978 attacking Synanon for its child abuse and for profits that flowed to Diedrich, weapons, threats, and also attacking authorities for their lack of oversight. Remarkably, the authorities refused to intercede. Though local newspapers and broadcast media covered the case, they were largely silenced by lawsuits from Synanon lawyers charging libel. The Associated Press did a study of Synanon's effects to discourage the press. And I'm not at all surprised to hear Synanon threaten the press. There's not really many articles about Synanon from that time. At least, there's very few from what I found, and I'm guessing this probably explains why. But you'd think, though, that with this ammunition, Synanon would be shut down, right? I mean, a grand jury accused them of child abuse, so that has to count for something, right? Well, no, it doesn't. And I'm not saying, I guess, like, it doesn't, but this corruption ran deep. Local authorities refused to investigate after the grand jury report issued, and this caught the attention of Dave Mitchell, who ran the small weekly The Point Reyes Light. Mitchell found the report rejection was led by Sheriff Lou Montanos, who turned out to have been nominated for sheriff with Synanon help, and who had given gun permits to Diedrich and second-in-command Dan Garrett. Mitchell developed a deep throat in the sheriff department. Art Disserheft. Fun aside here, this little weekly newspaper later earned a Pulitzer Prize for this. Synanon's purchase of over $200,000 of weapons from a single gun store also brought media attention. Lawsuits brought by Morantz and ones by Synanon against ABC and Time magazine ultimately turned out to be Synanon's undoing, giving through legal investigation journalists access to some internal documents on violence. Synanon members were instructed in writing to physically harm others, take responsibility for it, and never reveal Synanon's involvement. Those who went to jail for Synanon were treated as heroes. Diedrich officially declared it a holy war. It took a lot of civil lawsuits, many represented by Paul, for this to finally come to an end. A man named Dr. Cole sought $5 million in damages because they operated without a license, conducted unwarranted beatings, and caused him severe emotional distress. He said he was made to have a vasectomy he didn't desire, and though he was there to end a drug dependency problem, the brainwashing made him stay for 11 years. He said he was a personal servant to Diedrich and his late wife during that time. One Mrs. Wynne asserted she had been held captive for 9 days until her husband had to go and beg Synanon to release her after she'd just gone into the family planning center to calm her nerves. Apparently, that's where she once obtained birth control. A Superior Court judge in 1978 ordered that Synanon surrendered tape recordings of conversations of members at Synanon as evidence. Dietrich, of course, was found on those tapes, as he was heard saying, "Our new religious posture is this: don't mess with us. You can get killed dead, physically dead. If that isn't a threat, I don't know what is." Horribly, he wasn't kidding either, and we're about to get into that section on their violence. This is the part where it's going to get a little gross for a little bit. In one of the worst attacks on an outsider, Synanon members viciously beat a trucker in Badger, California on November 11, 1977, after a benign road rage incident where the trucker supposedly cut off a car full of Synites as they were on the highway. Dietrich reportedly shamed the four Synanon men involved for not physically attacking the trucker in retaliation. They remedied the situation by roaming the town with guns looking for the man, who turned out to be a guy named Rod Aitson. Once they found Aitson, the group pistol whipped him to a pulp in his own front yard, screaming that they were going to kill him. Aitzon's wife and 5 children could only watch on in horror. The Simonite thugs threatened to come back for his family if he ever messed with the cult again. Morantz knew that Synanon would not be above coming after him. And Morantz was correct. Synanon did try to come for him, and in one of the strangest ways I think I've ever heard. In 1978, shortly after the $300,000 lawsuit for Mrs. Wynne and its Synanon members put a rattlesnake in Paul's mailbox. Oxygen's article about their videos and reports on the topic stated, Paul Morantz was making some headway in letting the public know about what was happening with Synanon, and Chuck decided that he wanted to do away with Paul Morantz. Former member Selena Whitman told producers. Prior to the rattlesnake attack, neighbors saw a white van parked outside Morantz's house and wrote down the license plate number, which came back to being registered to the Church of Synanon. The same car was later spotted driving near Pacific Palisades, and when police noticed the plate number, they pulled them over. Inside were Synanon members and Imperial Marines Joe Musico and Lance Kenton, and they were held on suspicion of involvement in the rattlesnake attack. It was no secret that Charles Dietrich wanted to at least hurt Paul Morantz, if not kill him. So Lance Kenton and Joe Musico thought up this plan, and they went and found a rattlesnake. Thankfully, Paul survived the attack, but he was hospitalized for 6 days. A neighbor applied a tourniquet that saved his life, and fire department paramedics chopped off the snake's head with a shovel, discovering that the rattles had been removed so the snake could attack without warning. And 3 things here. First of all, what badass paramedics fighting a snake. I wish they could have saved it, but sometimes that's just not the way it works out, especially when your fear is totally engaged. Second of all, we have some amazing neighbors in this story, from those that saved Paul's life to the guy helping kids escape. And third, I guess we can add animal abuse to Synanon's list of crimes, because I really doubt they humanely removed that snake's rattles. And, I guess I don't know how you do that, but it probably wasn't done in a humane way. But what it does show was this was an intentional, thought-out attempt to take Paul's life. Before Paul discovered the snake, though, Dietrich fled to Europe like the coward he is, and don't worry, we will get back to him. This isn't all, though. Their violence wasn't limited to 2 people. Remember Gambonini, the one who was helping the children escape? They beat him for that. They also tied a former member, Tom Cardeneau, to a post and severely beat him for being an alleged spy. To add insult to injury, it was during his honeymoon that they did this. Many young teenagers who got too close to Synanon property were beaten brutally by Synanon mobs. Teeth were knocked out, believed trespassers were taken into the basements of Santa Monica Del Mar building, and worked over on directions of Dr. Robson. Synanon evicted by tossing people and belongings out of apartments, even off a roof. In the summer of 1978, NBC produced a hard-hitting news segment on Synanon. Following its broadcast, executives of the network and its corporate chairman received hundreds of threats from Synanon members and supporters, including letters that said, "Your actions place you in legal and physical peril, and we are going to teach you a lesson you will never forget." On September 21st, 1978, ex-member Phil Ritter was severely beaten by 2 members, causing him to fall into coma for a week. Fluid leaked into his spine, causing a near-fatal case of spinal meningitis. Former Synanon president Jack Hurst spoke out against Synanon and found his home door open and his dog hung. If I hated Synanon before, I loathe them now. This is why Synanon has been labeled so dangerous. As horrible as so many cults are, what I think makes Synanon especially scummy is how they were several cults in one. A church, a rehab center, they bonded around violence and controlled people's lives. It's really sick. One branch of Synanon that was founded in Germany is actually still in operation to this very day. So I'm not sure what the hell Germany is doing with Synanon or if maybe things have changed over there, but their impact is undeniable. The LA magazine wrote that to this day, there is disagreement over whether Dietrich ordered the violence perpetrated by Synanon members or merely stroked their rage. Former Synanon attorney Philip Burgett insists it was the latter. But three declarations written in 1983 by three Synanon officials in exchange for immunity from prosecution stated that Imperial Marines prepared a hit list of Synanon enemies that was approved by Dietrich's assistant, Walter Lubel. In a subsequent deposition, Dietrich claimed to have a very dim memory of 1977 due to a series of strokes, but he said, "Most of what Synanon did in 1977, at least what I knew about, I approved of because, as I pointed out before over and over again, I'm one hell of a good executive, and not too much ever went on in an organization that I ran that I didn't approve of. I don't know everything that went on, of course." According to three declarations, Lugo was the one who directed Musico and Alan Hubbard, members of Synanon, to attack Phil Ritter, and Lugo who ordered Musico and Lance Keaton, the son of jazz musician Stan Keaton, to travel to Los Angeles and plant the rattlesnake in Morance's mailbox. The day after the attack, police arrested Musico and Kenton. A month later, Los Angeles prosecutor John Watson and 30 law enforcement officials descended on Synanon's new $1 million compound in Lake Havasu to arrest Dietrich on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. They found him, according to Watson, in a stupor, staring straight ahead, an empty bottle of Chivas Regal in front of him. He was so drunk that he had to be carried to jail in a stretcher. What an appropriate ending for Chuck, honestly. Still, even then, Synanon was massive, and so it took a massive force to take them down. It took some time, but with all these lawsuits and charges stacking up, the government finally stepped in. In the 80s, the government revoked their tax-free status, essentially ending Synanon altogether. A judge found that Synanon perpetrated a fraud upon the court when Synanon lied, destroyed tape recordings they were ordered to turn over, deceived the court, you name it. Their once positive reputation was destroyed, and former members began to speak out too, according to the New York Times. By the middle of the 1980s, when the organization declared itself a religion, was condemned by the government for a corporate policy of terror and violence, and was stripped of its tax-exempt status, Synanon was declining in influence and prestige. Without their founder Chuck, as he was ordered not to take part in Synanon anymore and facing a $17 million charge from the IRS, Synanon floundered. Chuck somehow escaped with only 5 years of parole and a fine for the attempt on Paul's life. But Paul's grateful Charles tried to kill him himself. He says that Chuck was a cheap bastard who, when quoted a $10,000 price tag for a professional killer, chose the rattlesnake route. Charles died at 83 years old in 1997, 6 years after Synanon officially ended, in the US anyway. So, seriously, what the hell is going on with that German branch? And I know, this seems like this is where the episode should end. After all, what more is there to say about Synanon? Well, this is why Ali wanted me to talk about Synanon and look into it, because not only because it was one of the worst things out there, but because of what it inspired. As one source puts it, though not the first rehab, Synanon did much to convince the American public that addicts could be saved. It pioneered the idea of the ex-addict as drug counselor and a tough love therapy, and it invented a culture of recovery to replace the culture of street junkies. Members went on to found or play key roles in establishing numerous drug treatment centers and therapeutic communities of their own, including Cum Est in Venice, Delancey Street in San Francisco, Amity in Tucson, Phoenix House in New York City, and Daytop Village in Queens, New York. In turn, graduates of those programs would go on to start their own facilities, carrying with them traces of the Synanon approach. And this is what is so important about Synanon and cults like it. Synanon was obviously dangerous, and yet I'd never even really heard of them until starting to do research for this episode. Plus, when compared to other organizations or facilities I've talked about, they seem relatively short-lived. But the damage they did is incredible. They put the tough love idea out there without any counselors or medical professionals backing their methods. Former members established their own facilities based on it, a facility that once toed the fine line between tough love and abuse, only to leap overboard and become one of the most violent cults I've had to cover. Now, I won't pretend that these facilities listed are all violent, and not all are. Delancey Street is still open and they promote nonviolence and they do want their members to leave eventually. You know, they don't want to hold people hostage. 2S seem to have closed after financial troubles. Phoenix House, on the other hand, has some other issues. One 2015 Reuters report states, in November last year, OASAS suspended admissions to Belle Terre and 4 other Phoenix Houses of New York facilities. In a letter to Phoenix House's then chief executive in November 2014, OASAS said Phoenix House had persistent regulatory violations and resident/patient care concerns dating back several years. An OASAS site report on the 5 facilities went into graphic detail. The regulator's findings at some or all facilities included use of marijuana, cocaine, heroin, and other illegal drugs. Sexual activity among residents, reports of violence and sexual assault, insufficient, inadequately trained or abusive staff, dirty premises, and lax security, with residents coming and going as they wished. I'm not saying these issues are absolutely because this home was founded by someone who went to Synanon. Can't know that for sure. But this tough love mindset was popularized by them without a doubt. The abuse at the Elan School, the Judge Rottenberg Center, and so many other places we've talked about all stem from this. And yes, I know it's the Judge Rottenberg Center, but it's always going to be the Rottenberg Center to me. One Mother Jones article reads, the idea that punishment can be therapeutic is not unique to the Rottenberg Center. In fact, this notion is widespread among the hundreds of emotional growth boarding schools, wilderness camps, and tough love anti-drug programs that make up the billion-dollar teen residential treatment industry. This harsh approach to helping troubled teens has a long and disturbing history. No fewer than 50 programs, though not the Rottenberg Center, can trace their treatment philosophy directly or indirectly to the anti-drug cult called Synanon. In 1971, the federal government gave a grant to Florida organization called The Seed, which applied Synanon's method to teenagers, even those only suspected of trying drugs. In 1974, Congress opened an investigation into such behavior modification programs, finding that The Seed had used methods similar to the highly refined brainwashing techniques employed by the North Koreans. The bad publicity led some supporters of The Seed to create copycat organizations under a different name. Straight Incorporated was founded by Mel Sembler, a Bush family friend who would become the GOP's 2000 finance chair, and who heads Lewis Scooter Libby's legal defense fund. By the mid-80s, Straight was operating in 7 states. First Lady Nancy Reagan declared it her favorite anti-drug program. As with The Seed, abuse was omnipresent, including beatings and kidnappings of adult participants. Facing 7-figure legal judgments, it closed in 1993. But loopholes in state laws and lack of federal oversight allowed shuttered programs to simply change their names and reopen, often with the same staff in the same state, even in the same building. Straight spin-offs like Pathway Family Center are still in business. At least 3 dozen teens have died from these military-style tough love boot camps. And again, I can't blame Synanon for all of it, but they inarguably fueled this fire. They normalized tough love, which to them was just straight-up abuse. The idea that there's so many programs stemming from Chuck's philosophy, Chuck, who put a rattlesnake in the mailbox of a lawyer who represented his victims, is mind-blowing to me. The tough love approach is a pretty garbage approach in the first place. For many, it sends them deeper into their fears, anxieties, and makes people lash out all the more. Some sources say it can lead to relapse. Others say you should seek out a professional when staging interventions and using any tough love methods. Keep in mind, I'm not trying to say that it's not okay to set up boundaries, or that with friends or family members that may be struggling with an addiction. But what I am saying is downright insults, holding someone hostage, demanding they quit cold turkey, and those aspects of tough love that Synanon promoted can do far more harm than good. Again, I'm not at all a professional. I'm just reading a kind of generalized overview from all of my sources here. Don't take this as legitimate professional advice. Seek that out if you need it. I'm just a pyramid that really just doesn't want to see anyone suffer because of a rehab facility that really messed things up. But with that being said, that's where I'm going to end today's episode of The Corporate Casket. I hope you enjoyed it or learned something new today, and if you did, make sure to like this episode, follow, subscribe, wherever you're hearing this, so that you never miss another one whenever I upload. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Corporate Casket, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!